Hello and a very warm welcome back to the France 24 newsroom. We're interrupting our normal programming to take you to the Élysée Palace in just a few moments' time in central Paris, where President Emmanuel Macron is gearing up to outline his government's plans for the year ahead to journalists. This is, of course, the live feed coming into us there from the Élysée Palace. The French government, of course, had its first cabinet meeting this Wednesday morning after the Christmas and the New Year break. The president urged ministers during that meeting to push ahead with their plans to turn the country's economic fortunes around, bolster security, as well as tweak how the country deals with immigration. Let's listen now to what's happening there at the Élysée Palace in central Paris.
In a troubled world, in a dangerous world, in a fascinating world, I could also quote Joan Didion, who said, nothing is really terrible when you examine it closely. So examining, naming things, putting them into perspective is our job, it's our daily role. And it's for this reason that we need to have access to your thoughts, and no matter how complex they are. In recent months, access has been limited because you have just come to power, and you also have expressed the will to distance yourself a little from the press because of your functions. But some have misinterpreted this and have said that it goes against the very purpose of journalism, which is communication. So it forces us to call ourselves into question. We don't want this distance between you and us to lead to misunderstandings. We don't want to dictate the way you communicate. It's up to you to do so. But we have to ask the questions which the French people are asking, and also the questions beyond our frontiers which the foreign press are asking. They're very well represented here today. So asking a question is a very simple thing. Yes, we must try to find out what is happening, even when the authorities don't want to tell us what is happening. So after 1 year or after 6 months in power, we would like to hear what you have to say about housing, taxation, the ecology, Europe, the use of public funds, migrants, and poverty. And we hope to be able to ask questions with the representatives of the presidential press. It is our role also to feed back what the French people are saying. There are several hundred of us here today and thousands across France who are part of democracy. Democracy today is threatened in Malta, Turkey, Hungary, perhaps in Austria. Those are the countries that are close to us. Here in France, the right to inform is respected. The newspapers are working hard. They are thinking and choosing under the critical eye of public opinion, which is very, very strict, very demanding regarding the profession. The journalist profession is changing, and we are under constraints. We are facing economic constraints, and new media are appearing. And beyond the changes of media, the social networks are changing everything. And there is a crying need for serious information with verified facts. So we have to fight for the imprecision of a lot of unchecked news, of a lot of fake news. And we must bear witness to our time and provoke thought. We must seek truth beyond the secrecy of power. And it is true, of course, that journalists sometimes get it wrong, and they sometimes recognize that they get it wrong. Defending the press is also a question of point of view. There are comments and there are surveys, there are different interviews, different points of view. And some editorialists are a bit narcissistic, of course, but 35 journalists report on what is happening in a country that is suffering suffering, that has moments of enthusiasm. Journalists are French citizens with their own history, their childhood, a relationship to the world, and good reasons for asking questions. Mr. President, many journalists here have known you for some time. Since you have reached, first of all, you were an advisor to a president, then you became a minister, and they have seen you rise to your election and the celebrations in the Louvre and on the Champs-Élysées, and your hosting of a visit by the President of the United States. So many journalists actually follow you on a day-to-day basis as you travel, and we share with you the strengths and the weaknesses, the difficulties and the positive sides of your job. You say you want to keep control over the timetable, and I must say that we also have to write reports, we have to go to press conferences, and we would like journalists to be transported in good conditions when they travel with you abroad, and that we should have all the resources to be able to work in secure conditions for the benefit of our fellow citizens. So, to conclude, a tradition. Happy New Year, Mr. President, and we see your wife very often. Happy New Year to you, your wife, your family, your advisors, and notably the press corps, the press section, rather, of the Élysée. 2017 was your year. 2018 is a blank page which you will have to write on, and we will supply the comments on this year. We are here to listen and to observe.
Madame la Ministre,
Madam Minister, Mr. Minister, Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted, in spite of what some people say, to be here with you here today, as you have just said, to comply with a tradition. But as the year begins, we look back on the previous year and we take some resolutions and share convictions for the coming year. Above all, before I share my convictions with you, I wish to express my greetings to you for good health, my wishes that you have good health and success in your activities. I have a few convictions I'd like to share with you. What brings us together, what links us, what ties us, the reason why you're here today, is the great democratic history which links power and the press. And when we look at all the challenges, we mustn't look only at our day-to-day lives, but to broaden the perspective and take a look at the big picture. In 2017, 65 journalists were killed working as journalists. They were in theaters of war, they were assassinated by the criminals, they died because they were seeking the truth, and they wanted to overcome lies. This was a lower figure than in 2016, because there are some parts of the world where journalists realized that they were targets, and many did not go to those parts of the world. I would like our thoughts to go to Stéphane Villeneuve and Véronique Robert and their Kurdish colleagues who died in Mosul this year. 326 journalists today are in prison because they are saying things that displease the authorities. So not only do they the authorities censor the journalists, but they sometimes imprison them. So the freedom of the press is not something ordinary. It is the highest expression of freedom. It's the top. It is usually the first freedom that the authoritarian regimes try to restrict. And every time we can intervene to obtain the liberation of imprisoned journalists, we must do so. That's why France must not renounce to engage in a dialogue with regimes that don't share its values. That has been my constant policy. We must defend our principles, our freedoms, our requirements, but engage in an indispensable acceptable dialogue which allows us to get results. If we remain silent, it may be uncomfortable. By being silent, we cannot obtain the practical results that we want. With Turkey, we have had 2 trials this year with the arrests of a reporter and another journalist, a French journalist. So I have on 2 occasions raised the issues with President Erdogan to ask them to be freed immediately, and I would like to pay tribute to the mobilization of the entire profession every time with a sense of responsibility and efficiency, and effectively we have obtained concrete results because we mobilized, because we sustained the dialogue without this diminishing the fact that in Turkey, several other journalists, notably European journalists, are still in prison. I will continue to raise these questions with Turkey and to ask Turkey why they are preventing journalists from doing their job. I will also be defending our values and our interests in so doing. Similarly, as journalists must go all over the world to inform, our duty as political leaders is not to dialogue only with those who agree with us. And this is what I'll continue to do, because that is the way we can protect our citizens and defend what we believe in. This freedom of the press is recognized by international conventions, but it needs to be protected and should be protected by the United Nations. When I spoke to the General Assembly of the United Nations last September, I advocated the creation of a special representative of the Secretary General for the protection of journalists. Antonio Guterres shares my concern and has started to set up this position, which should materialize very soon. Today, we are living in a barbaric period, writing the truth, looking for the truth, writing on a blank page what is true is something irreplaceable. The freedom of the press today is not only attacked by dictatorships, it is also mistreated in countries that are part of the great democracies of the world. It is mistreated even in Europe. Madam President, you mentioned several European countries which have curtailed the freedom of the press recently. And when I spoke to the European Court of Human Rights, I expressed my determination that Turkey and Russia, who have signed the European Convention of Human Rights, should respect their commitments, notably with regard to the freedom of the press. Here again, we must not be naive. The cause of human rights and freedom of the press is a cause which the democracies have accepted, and it refers to an ancient, well-established base of values, a common denominator of values, which is based on a consensus, but it is under attack today. This consensus is in danger today. Attacking those countries for not respecting the European Convention on Human Rights or the European Union would be too easy. We need to sanction the countries that don't abide by their commitments, that keep their commitments. But at the same time, we must keep them within the scope of the what history has given us. We must defend the liberties of a democracy. The temptation exists, growing temptations within Europe and outside Europe, the temptations of an illiberal democracy. The crisis we are experiencing today is unprecedented. It is a break with the market economy, the middle classes, social equilibrium, democracy, and attachment to the liberties that go with democracy. Since the 18th century, this basis had allowed us to progress as democracies, and this base is under attack. And in the name of protecting a state, or sometimes in the name of fighting against a threat, and in the name of a fascination for nationalism, several political regimes are tempted by illiberalism, political illiberalism. And every time it is obviously the press that is threatened first and foremost. The press is a counterpower, is a counterweight, and when that limited counterweight is being restricted, when the independence of the judiciary is being called into question, it is the very vitality of our democracy, which has been developing for several centuries, which is under attack. Democracy is a fragile edifice, and we are once again aware, more and more aware of its fragility. And yet the people and the leaders have a sense of history, and we must support these requirements, the requirements. Neither in the European Convention on Human Rights nor in the European Union will we accept the slightest softness, the slightest compromise with the basic freedoms, the freedom of expression and the freedom of conscience, the freedom of thought, which are the very ingredients of the counterweights, the counterpowers, which form part of our democracies. We must not take all this lightly, and this will be one of the fights which France will undertake in 2018, sometimes with the support of several other members. Beyond the temptation of illiberalism is the very model of journalism that is being called into question or even corrupted. False fake news. Fake news is, as the English-speaking world describes it, is spreading, and therefore at a time when the work of the press and of journalists is of fundamental importance, it has never been easier to pretend to be a journalist, to claim to be a journalist. And there is a lack of competence on the part of many people who confuse everything. And we have collectively, gradually let this confusion develop through perhaps excessive fascination in horizontal communication and allowing giving an equal voice to everybody, to taking that much too far without allowing any choices to be. It is not the case. All speech is not on the same level, and some citizens invent rumors and false news, fake news, and this wouldn't be a problem if it was just a joke, a sort of global joke, but in reality there is a strategy which aims to cultivate doubts and suggest that what the politicians and the media say is basically lying. And lying today tries to pass itself off as truth. And the elites have a role to play, have played a role in this, where the journalists have to prove what they say. The journalists have to provide evidence for what they say. Those who propagate fake news say it's for you to prove that we are wrong. So we have allowed the standards of truth to be based on the ability to diffuse, to spread fake news and to instill doubt. So the aim of populism is to undermine democracy. And And you, the journalists, and us, the politicians, are the targets of people who are distilling propaganda. And this rise in fake news today is twinned with illiberalism. It is often used by powers who are having fun, as it were, who are enjoying the weaknesses of democracy and recognizing a form of authority. What do we mean by authority? Recognizing that there is an author who has either invented something or who has you are all authors in a way, and in this world, in this globalized world, you do exercise some authority. And the slightest blogger, the slightest propagandist denies, if you recognize in that, denies the collective responsibility for defiance to spread in our democratic system. The absolute relativism in which we often are facing is exploited today by men and women who consider that anything goes, and they will be seeking to manipulate our democracies more and more. Thousands of social media accounts are spreading the fake news in many languages across the world about fake news about people, about events. And this works. It works. We know that it works. We have seen how it works abroad, but also in France. The democratic process is damaged by this, and the indignation that takes over excludes thought, excludes reasonable thinking. And this is what the manipulators want, the machines for spreading false news. And so the professional media are threatened. The barriers have been put in place, but the recent campaigns have shown the weakness of those barriers and our collective inability to find solutions to this problem. You, journalists, are in the front line. You are the first to be threatened by this propaganda. They use your tone formats, your vocabulary, your terminology, and sometimes they even hire agents from among you who are financed by illiberal democracies whom we criticize every day. But the news spreads, becomes ordinary, acceptable, and it contributes to the confusion which we have accepted. The confidence in third parties who give objective information is under threat, and through you, it's liberal democracy which is under threat. There are two possible responses, at least, to this issue, and I think we should bring these responses to the fore collectively. First of all, the state has a role to play. That's why I have decided that we're going to change our judicial system to protect our democracy from fake laws. A bill will be submitted to Parliament shortly. During election periods on internet platforms, the content will be subject to new rules. Propagating fake news on the social media only costs a few thousand euros and can be done anonymously. Platforms will be required to be more transparent, notably with regard to sponsored content, the identity of the advertisers, and to limit the amount of money dedicated to that content. So these are the rules which we need to sustain our democratic life. If fake news is propagated, a complaint can be filed to a magistrate, and this could lead to the closure of the platform, of the internet platform concerned. the powers of the regulator will be strengthened in 2018 to fight against any efforts to influence what is being said in this country. So the regulator will be able to refuse to sign agreements with certain media. This will allow the regulator, if there is illegal activity, to suspend or to cancel an agreement, a convention. If we want to protect liberal democracies, we must be strong and we must have clear rules. This new system will also require that the technicians must intervene if and exercise their responsibility. And so we are preparing a bill. We don't want the liberties of the press to be threatened. We will be consulting you, the journalists, on these new rules. We must continue to strengthen the sense of responsibility of the broadcasters, the platforms, who mustn't be allowed to continue mixing up all the different kinds of news, and notably terrorist propaganda. We must raise awareness of the risks of terrorist propaganda. The second course of action, which is indispensable, depends on you. I know that many of you are thinking about the ethics of journalism, and the Reporters Without Borders approach, which respects the ethics of the journalist profession, seems to be not only interesting but also desirable. It is up to you to organize the rules, to structure the rules of your profession. If we no longer want all news to be put on the same level without any discrimination, without any hierarchy, the time has come for your profession to converge on certain basic principles. And in 2018, I hope 2018 will be an opportunity for a substantial debate. Not all the words, not all the speeches have the same value, the same worth. Some are neither journalistic, nor naive, nor innocent. They're pure propaganda with hidden political projects which are detrimental to our democracy. The media are being completely transformed as the impact of digitalization is affecting our practices and the economy of the information, the modes of broadcasting of news, which will call for indispensable action on the part of all the players in the profession, so that those who broadcast messages, news, should be able to continue to have a sustainable economic model that will allow those of you who work in the written press to be able to reach the readers.